Yo, what's up guys, it's BrendanMushi, and in this video we're going to be talking about bursts and more specifically some tips on when to burst, when not to burst, and the concept of burst baiting in general. I know a lot of you that follow my YouTube channel are newer Guilty Gear players, and with Plus R getting an update with rollback netcode and Xrd coming out in April 2021, there's more and more players getting into the franchise, which is awesome. One of the first things new players learn is the mechanic of bursting and the fundamentals of what it does, but what I hope to accomplish with this video is to help you take it to the next level, so you can be more conscious of your burst and your opponent's burst. I'll mostly be using Guilty Gear Xrd Rev 2 in this guide, but most of these concepts will apply to Plus R and Xrd as well, so let's start off with the basics. Burst is represented by a gauge that is very clearly labeled burst. Pressing D plus any attack button while your burst gauge is full will release an explosion that will blow back opponents on hit but can still be blocked. Burst can be used while getting hit, while blocking, or while knocked down, and in these scenarios it is a blue burst. If used in neutral, meaning you are not getting hit or blocking, you will get a gold burst. You cannot burst during throws or overdrives. The burst gauge will refill over time, and it also fills faster if you get hit. Bursts are helpful in that you can prevent yourself from taking the full brunt of a damaging combo, you can deny your opponent's attempts at Okizeme, and you can force your opponent off of you when being pressured. If your burst hits the opponent, you gain some of your burst gauge back, meaning you'll get it back quicker. If it's blocked or whiffs, then it completely empties, taking a longer amount of time to restore. Gold burst always restores some of your burst gauge regardless, and it also gives you full meter if it connects. Blue burst is fully punishable on the way down, but gold burst is strike invulnerable even after the explosion, meaning you'd need to punish with a throw. Both bursts are completely strike invulnerable up until after the explosion, but neither is throw invulnerable. Since bursts are airborne, this means you can be air thrown out of your burst by an aware opponent, or as the Guilty Gear community likes to call it, getting your soul snatched.
He sent him home with no soul.
Okay, now that we've covered the basics of how burst works, let's look at some strategies on when bursting might be a good or a bad idea in relationship to you and your opponent's life bar. Bursting early in the round when you have a lot of life can be a good strategy because this way while you're fighting, if the match lasts long enough, you likely will be able to burst twice in the same round. However, if you choose to hang on to your burst, this means that when your life does become low, you're put into a difficult situation. Since burst doesn't carry over to the next round, if you choose to burst at low health and still lose the round, you've not only lost a round, but now you have no burst for the next round, which can be a very dangerous situation since you don't have meter, since meter doesn't carry over to the next round. So if the opponent scores a hit on you, you essentially don't have any defensive tools to get out other than what your character may or may not have. This is why if you have low life and the opponent has full life, it's typically not a good idea to burst. It's safer to just save your burst for the next round. Now, if you're both on low health, it's up to the player. You could potentially burst and shortly after win the round, which would make it worth it, or you could burst and lose anyway, putting you in a bad spot for the next round. It's up to you to make that decision. You just need to understand the risk. Okay, so we know what burst does and we understand the risk and reward in relationship to the round counter and health bars, but now let's look at the most common ways bursts get baited and how we can avoid falling victim to it. The first thing you need to do is relax. A lot of new players panic burst when certain moves hit without considering if the move is burst safe or if their opponent is expecting the burst, or even that the move would launch them too high or too far away for the burst to actually even hit your opponent in the first place. If you get hit, relax and look for a safe point to burst. When is a safe point to burst? Before we get to that, let's look at what it means for an attack to be burst safe. One way an attack can be burst safe is that from the moment the attack hits you, if you burst at that moment, the attack recovers quick enough in time for the attacker to be able to block your bursts. Moves that recover quick enough to be burst safe can range from special moves to normals. It's all character specific and requires matchup knowledge to know what is and is not burst safe. Quick attacks like 2P, 5P, and jump Ps are typically burst safe across the cast due to having such low recovery, but as I said, attacks that are burst safe vary from character to character. Soul's jump heavy, for example, recovers in 0 frames, meaning if you burst it on hit, Soul can block your burst afterwards. So you might be thinking, well, I don't have time to look at every single character and all of their moves and see which of them are burst safe or not. And you don't have to. When starting out, it's less important to know what you can't burst, and it's more important to know what you can burst. You want to look for something that you are able to burst consistently. To do that, you want to look for special moves that take a long time to recover that are common combo enders, sometimes used in the middle of the combo, or you could even OTG burst a move that's used for an Okizeme setup that has a long startup and recovery if they're close enough for you to do that burst and for it to hit. With this method of bursting, the only way your burst could get baited is if they Roman cancel the move that they were doing and block. But that would be a hard read or a good reaction or some kind of combination of the two, assuming they even have the meter to do so. Sometimes with this method you might take a few extra hits, but the peace of mind that your burst was successful can be the difference between losing and winning a round. At least you're guaranteeing that a portion of your burst come back so that you might be able to use it later on in the round. And you're also not putting yourself in a situation where you have no burst. It's going to take longer for your burst to come back, and you're put back in that same oaky situation where you have to deal with your opponent's pressure and mix-up game. Another way that a move can be burst safe is that your burst doesn't actually reach the opponent because the opponent's attack has a disjointed hurt box. So what that means is that the opponent is able to hit you with a long distance attack, but the attack's hurt box, meaning the actual hitbox that allows you to hit the attacker, is much closer to the attacker's body than the actual tip of the attack. So a lot of normals that are like swords that go really far distance, Johnny, or Axel, if you attempt to burst a lot of those characters' normals, they might not be close enough to you for the burst to actually hit, so you have to be wary of that as well. Another common way that bursts can get baited is jump canceling. When you jump cancel an attack, you are able to immediately air block a burst or even air throw it before it comes out. This can sometimes be a hard read, but it can also be an option select. If you don't know what an option select is, or OS for short, it's essentially when one input or sequence of inputs by a player result in beating two or more options of the opposing player's response to that sequence without the inputting player needing to think about it. Essentially, it's one action that beats several of the opponent's options against that action. It's like throwing out rock and it beats scissors and paper regardless of what the opponent chooses. The person throwing out rock doesn't care, they don't have to think about it, they know that if the opponent throws scissors, they'll still lose, and if they throw out paper, they'll still lose. It's not my problem. So at this point in the video, we're pretty much going to get into a couple of common option selects that you'll run into. A lot of players will use various option selects in which if you choose not to burst, the combo will still continue, but if you do burst, your burst will get baited, which can result in it being blocked, air thrown, etc. So I'm going to go over some common option selects that might happen so that you can either add them into your gameplay or you might understand them when they happen to you. So I mentioned before that jump canceling can be an option select, and there's a couple of ways that jump canceling can lead into an option select. One of the ways is off of moves that do multiple hits and are launching the opponent for an air combo. Examples would be on an airborne opponent, Kai's 2HS is 2H, Heihun's 2H, and Venom Close Slash. So the attack that connects right before the launch, so in Kai and Heihun's example, it would be the first hit since there's two total hits. If they burst that first hit, it's completely burst safe if the attacker does it correctly. And in Venom's case, if you burst the second hit, it's completely burst safe if Venom does it correctly. And so what the attacking player has to do is the final hit, so in Venom's case the third hit, and in Kai and Heihun's case it would be the second hit. When that hit connects, you jump cancel immediately like you normally would for an air combo. You want to do it as fast as possible, and then immediately block in the air as soon as you jump. And then that's about the point when the opponent's burst would go off should they burst the first hit. So if they burst the first hit of Kai's 2H, or they burst the second hit of Venom Close Slash, or the first hit of Heihun 2H, you will block their burst. Another example would be just the nature of how throws work in Guilty Gear. So the way that throws work in Guilty Gear is they're performed with forward or back plus heavy, either on the ground or in the air. But you only get throw, number one, when you're close enough to throw them, and number two, when the opponent is in a throwable state. Now, when you're comboing an opponent, they can't be thrown because you can't throw an opponent that's in hit stun. But when you burst, you immediately put yourself in a state where you're strike invulnerable, but you're throwable. So this allows for some option selects where, in Soul's case, for example, this is a very common scenario. Soul can hit you with a wild throw, which, as we said before, you can't burst throws, so you can't burst. And then when Soul hits you with any attack button, it'll usually be his 2H or 5H, you now gain the ability to burst. And a lot of players that don't know this will burst at that spot. It's a bad spot to burst Soul, because most Soul players will jump and immediately input an air throw. And what happens here is that if you burst that 2H or 5H after the wild throw, Soul will jump up and he'll immediately throw you by inputting a jump throw. If you don't burst, Soul will get a jump H because you're in hit stun and you're unthrowable, which gives you the jump H instead. I mentioned earlier in an example that Soul's jump H is 0 frame recovery. So even if you didn't burst yet, now if you burst, he's still burst safe. So he's gonna block your burst after that as well. And so that's why I mentioned before that you don't necessarily need to know all of this. You can just wait for him to do Volcanic Viper or Bandit Revolver and then just burst that, so you don't even have to deal with some of these option selects, but it is something that you should be aware of. So while doing a back heavy or forward heavy will give you a heavy attack button if they aren't throwable, and will give you a throw if they are throwable and you're in range for a throw, because of the input priority system in Guilty Gear, if you press 2 attack buttons at the same time, it will give you the weaker strength attack. So due to this, you don't always have to option select a throw with a heavy attack button. You can option select it with a jump slash by inputting jump forward slash plus heavy slash at the same time. Same thing with kick or punch. Any button of your choosing that's weaker than heavy slash, press it with heavy slash. If they burst, they'll get thrown. If they don't, you'll get the appropriate button that you want. So that can be utilized for you to option select throws as well. A good way to also deal with burst is Blitz Shield as well. So if you didn't know, if you actually hit someone with a charged Blitz Shield, it doesn't have to be max charged, but if you just hit someone with a Blitz Shield, it will actually reduce their burst gauge and actually take their ability to burst away. On top of the fact that when you're actually charging a blitz, it'll actually absorb the burst as well. So oftentimes, let's say if you're Soul and you hit someone with a Fafnir, if they're really low health and you know that this combo is going to kill, you can just charge burst instead. So that way, if they burst, you'll absorb it and punish it. And if they don't, you'll hit them and take away the burst anyway, and then still be able to kill them afterwards. And of course, another key option select for baiting bursts, like I mentioned earlier in the video, mashing 2P, 5P, or jump P. Just be careful not to mash too fast because you'll actually get out an extra punch and cause yourself to get hit by the burst, but a very key option select, so use it to your advantage as well. And once again, like mentioned earlier, overdrives do put that X over their burst and doesn't allow them to, so if your overdrive is enough to close out the round and you think they're going to burst, you can secure the round with that overdrive as well, so don't forget about that. Alright, so that just about wraps up the video, guys. I hope this was able to help you guys out. Now, I know this didn't cover every possible option select in the game or every possible character-specific way to avoid a burst or block or bait a burst, but it was just to give you an idea as to what options you might have and things to look out for. If you're a newer player and some of these things sounded daunting or you might not understand them, that's okay. The key takeaway is just to don't panic when you get hit and just look for things that are safe for you to burst and just make smart decisions. Try to be more conscious of your burst, and if you're a player that's trying to get better at baiting burst, pay more attention to it. The round's going to start with both of you having burst, and it's likely that when you get that hit that's going to lead into high damage, they're very likely going to use that burst. So just try to keep these concepts in mind so that you can be more aware and work on actually baiting those out so that way you can get easier rounds. So once again, I hope this video was helpful to you guys. If you feel that there's anything I missed or any tips or advice you have for me or other players or whoever, make sure to leave a comment down below. Like and subscribe, it helps me out a lot. I'll be putting out videos weekly, and I do stream every Sunday at 12 p.m. Pacific time, so you can catch me over on Twitch on twitch.tv/BrendanMushi if you're interested. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.